missions that changed history.
Part 1. The Crucible of War. The Second World War, a conflict of unparalleled scale and destruction, often conjures images of massive armies, devastating battles, and technological warfare. Yet, amidst the colossal movements of troops and the relentless drumbeat of combat, another, less heralded story unfolds, that of courage, ingenuity, and profound humanity manifested in daring rescue missions. These were not the grand campaigns that fill history books, but moments of concentrated heroism that snatched individuals and sometimes entire communities from the jaws of annihilation. These acts of rescue, executed by soldiers, civilians, and partisans, often against impossible odds, saved thousands of lives and, in many cases, fundamentally altered the trajectory of the war and the shape of the post-war world. The nature of modern total war meant that the line between combatant and civilian was brutally blurred. Entire populations became targets, whether through aerial bombardment, systematic persecution, or the sheer chaos of shifting front lines. The need for rescue missions thus became a grim necessity, extending far beyond the traditional military task of recovering downed pilots or isolated patrols. They encompassed the desperate efforts to save Jews and other persecuted groups from the Holocaust, the evacuation of encircled armies, the clandestine recovery of sensitive intelligence personnel, and the mass movement of refugees escaping the inferno. These missions were unified by a core element: an extraordinary moral commitment overriding the immense physical danger. The individuals who executed them, from the quiet diplomats who forged false papers to the commandos who braved enemy fire, shared a conviction that a single life, or a small group of lives, held an immeasurable value worth risking everything for. Understanding the history of World War II is incomplete without acknowledging these incredible feats, which stand as enduring testaments to the power of human compassion in the face of absolute inhumanity. Part 2. The Miracle of Dunkirk, an Army's Escape. One of the earliest and most iconic rescue operations of the war was the evacuation of Allied soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk, codenamed Operation Dynamo. In May 1940, the rapid and devastating German blitzkrieg had trapped the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, and parts of the French army against the English Channel. The situation was catastrophic. Military commanders estimated that, at best, only 45,000 men could be saved. The loss of the entire BEF would have been a fatal blow to the UK's ability to continue the war, potentially forcing an immediate surrender and altering the entire course of the conflict. The British government, led by the newly appointed Winston Churchill, mobilized every available vessel. This was the moment the little ships entered history. Hundreds of civilian craft, fishing boats, pleasure yachts, motor launches, lifeboats, and Thames River ferries sailed across the channel, joining the destroyers and larger naval vessels under relentless air and artillery attack. The logistical challenges were staggering. Shallow waters prevented larger ships from nearing the shore, necessitating the use of the small civilian fleet to ferry soldiers from the beaches and makeshift jetties, often constructed from vehicles and rubble, to the waiting transports. The rescue was an act of national will and improvisation. Over 9 days, from May 27th to June 4th, 1940, a remarkable 338,226 Allied soldiers were evacuated. This staggering number exceeded all expectations and, critically, preserved the core of the British Army. Churchill, in his famous "We shall fight on the beaches" speech, acknowledged that wars are not won by evacuations. However, the rescue instilled a powerful sense of defiance and unity in the British people. It was a moral victory that allowed Britain to survive the subsequent Battle of Britain and remain in the fight, a vital stepping stone for the eventual Allied victory. Without the soldiers saved at Dunkirk, the fight for the European continent would have been infinitely harder, perhaps impossible, and the war's end delayed or changed irrevocably. Part 3. The Holocaust Rescuers. The Righteous Among the Nations. The Nazi regime's final solution was a systematic attempt to annihilate European Jewry, rendering the act of rescue an act of profound, life-threatening rebellion. These missions were highly personalized, clandestine, and often carried out by individuals or small networks operating in the shadows of the German occupation. They involved extraordinary bravery and ingenuity, fundamentally changing the destiny of thousands targeted for extermination. One of the most famous examples is Oskar Schindler, a German industrialist and Nazi Party member. Initially motivated by profit, he underwent a moral transformation. He used his factory in occupied Poland, DEF, as a sanctuary. By bribing, manipulating, and negotiating with Nazi officials, he kept his Jewish workers safe from deportation to the death camps. He manufactured false lists, claiming his workers were essential for the war effort, and ultimately saved approximately 1,200 lives. Schindler's rescue was a calculated campaign of subversion from within the system, a testament to the power of one individual's moral choice. Another towering figure is Raoul Wallenberg, a Swedish diplomat posted to Budapest in 1944, a time when the last large Jewish community in Europe was being ruthlessly targeted for deportation. Wallenberg launched the massive rescue operation using the power of diplomacy and sheer audacity. He issued thousands of Schutzpasses, protective passports, identifying the bearers as Swedish citizens awaiting repatriation, placing them under the protection of the neutral Swedish crown. He also established 32 safe houses across Budapest, flying the Swedish flag and declaring them extraterritorial property. He personally intervened on death marches and at train stations, pulling people off trains bound for Auschwitz, often bluffing and threatening Nazi and Hungarian Aerocross officers. He is credited with saving tens of thousands of lives in the final, desperate months of the war. The Zgoda Council in Poland represents an organized underground effort. This Polish Catholic organization was the only group in German-occupied Europe specifically established for the purpose of saving Jews. Its members, including figures like Irina Sendler, focused on providing false papers, finding hiding places, and smuggling children out of the ghettos. Sendler, working with the Warsaw Social Welfare Department, smuggled approximately 2,500 Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto, hiding them in prearranged safe houses, convents, and orphanages. She meticulously recorded their original names on tissue paper, which she buried in jars to ensure their identity could be restored after the war. These missions, often resulting in death if discovered, preserved not only lives, but also the collective memory and future of European Jewry. Part 4. The Airman's Lifeline, the Comet Line, and OSS operations. The skies over occupied Europe were a constant battleground. When Allied airmen were shot down, they faced immediate capture, torture, or execution. The rescue of these highly trained personnel and their safe return to Britain was a mission of high strategic importance, as the replacement of air crews was a slow and costly process. This necessity gave rise to intricate and perilous escape and evasion networks. The Comet Line, or Line Comet, was one of the most successful and celebrated of these networks. Originating in Belgium, it stretched through occupied France and across the Pyrenees Mountains to the neutral border of Spain, from where the airmen could be repatriated via Gibraltar. Founded by the Belgian woman André de Jong, known as DD, the line was primarily run by ordinary civilians, housewives, students, priests, and farmers, who risked their lives daily to shelter, feed, clothe, and guide the airmen. The operation was a logistical marvel. Couriers would move airmen from safe house to safe house, supplying them with false papers and civilian clothes. The final, most dangerous leg involved the grueling trek over the rugged Pyrenees, often guided by Basque smugglers. The average journey from Brussels to the Spanish border took between 6 and 8 weeks. Despite being repeatedly infiltrated by the German Abwehr,
which led to the capture and execution of many agents, the Comet Line successfully escorted over 700 Allied airmen to safety. Each rescued airman returned to fly again, representing hundreds of thousands of hours of training and experience returned to the Allied war effort. The American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, also conducted direct rescue missions, often deep behind enemy lines. Operation Carpetbagger was a covert air operation that flew modified B-24 Liberator bombers at low altitudes and under the cover of darkness to drop agents, equipment, and supplies to resistance groups. Occasionally, these planes would perform daring pickup operations, landing in remote fields to exfiltrate downed airmen, key intelligence agents, and even political figures. One notable OSS operation was the rescue of thousands of Allied prisoners of war, POWs, in the Balkans. Operation Halyard, also known as the Air Bridge of Hope, was one of the most remarkable rescue missions of the latter half of the war. Between August and December 1944, a vast rescue effort was launched to save over 500 American airmen who had been shot down over German-occupied Yugoslavia. With the crucial help of the Serbian Chetnik resistance, led by Draza Mihailovic, a makeshift airstrip was secretly constructed by local villagers near the remote village of Pranjan. In a series of 50 secret flights, OSS and 15th Air Force C-47 transport planes landed and took off under the cover of darkness, successfully evacuating 512 Allied airmen. It was the largest single rescue mission of Allied airmen from behind enemy lines in World War II, a mission that required profound trust between the OSS agents and the local resistance, risking certain death for all involved if the Germans discovered the remote airstrip. Part 5. The Civilian Exodus. Rescue by Sea and Land. Not all great rescues were the domain of professional military or clandestine agents. The mass movement of civilians, refugees, the wounded, and those escaping persecution constitutes some of the largest and most challenging rescue missions. The evacuation of Allied wounded from Crete in May 1941 was a brutal but critical naval operation. Following the intense German invasion of the island, thousands of British, Australian, and New Zealand troops were trapped. The Royal Navy, having suffered devastating losses to German air attacks, mounted a risky final effort. Under continual bombardment, the ships moved in and out of the ports and bays, eventually rescuing over 17,000 troops, although thousands were left behind and captured. This action, while costly, preserved a fighting force essential for the later North African and Italian campaigns. In the Far East, the Burma campaign involved a massive, often improvised evacuation of hundreds of thousands of civilians, mostly Indian and British, escaping the rapid Japanese advance in 1942. The majority of the escapees had to undertake a grueling 500-mile journey on foot through the inhospitable jungles and mountains to the safety of India. This was less a centralized military mission and more a humanitarian crisis managed by a small number of military and civilian officials, missionaries, and indigenous guides. The escapees faced starvation, disease, especially dysentery and malaria, and the constant threat of Japanese patrols. While many perished, the sheer scale of the exodus, estimated at over 400,000 people, represents one of the largest civilian rescue movements in history, saving a vast population from the brutal regime of the Japanese occupation. Later in the war, the mass movements from the Eastern Front were perhaps the most desperate. Operation Hannibal, January-May 1945, although initiated by the German Navy, evolved into one of the largest maritime evacuations in history, moving military personnel and, crucially, hundreds of thousands of German civilians escaping the advancing Soviet Red Army. While its purpose was military, the humanitarian effect was immense. Over 1.2 million people were moved across the Baltic Sea from East Prussia and the Baltic states to safer territories. This operation highlights the complexity of wartime rescue, where even adversaries can, in a strange twist of fate, be the subjects of a mass rescue effort spurred by a common, immediate threat. Part 6. The ethics of risk and the long-term impact. The incredible World War II rescue missions were not without a profound human cost. For every successful rescue, there was a risk of betrayal, capture, and the execution of the rescuers and those they sought to save. The decision to launch a rescue mission was often a high-stakes gamble, balancing the immediate value of the lives to be saved against the potential loss of vital resources or the lives of the rescuers themselves. The long-term impact of these missions extends far beyond the immediate preservation of life. Political and strategic impact. The rescue of the BEF at Dunkirk enabled Britain to remain a cohesive fighting force, providing the essential base for the eventual invasion of Europe. The repatriation of airmen via the Comet Line conserved highly trained human capital, directly boosting the effectiveness of the strategic bombing campaign against Germany. The moral and cultural impact. The actions of the righteous among the nations, the Schindlers, Wallenbergs, and the members of Zagota provided a desperately needed counterpoint to the moral abyss of the Holocaust. Their stories became the foundation for a post-war ethical framework that emphasized individual responsibility and humanitarian intervention. They prove that even in the darkest moments, profound moral courage can prevail, offering hope to future generations facing genocidal threats. The concept of the righteous is now a global ethical standard recognized by Yad Vashem, Israel's official Holocaust memorial. Foundation for post-war humanitarianism. The sheer logistical challenge and moral imperative of the refugee crisis and mass evacuations in World War II directly informed the creation of post-war international bodies. The scale of the displaced population underscored the urgent need for global cooperation, leading to the establishment of organizations like the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR. The lessons learned in makeshift airlifts, sea evacuations, and underground networks laid the groundwork for modern disaster relief and refugee aid protocols. The rescue missions of World War II are more than footnotes in a military history. They are core chapters in the history of human courage. They were the moment when individuals chose to see a person, not a statistic, and acted with extraordinary selflessness. They changed history not only by saving thousands who would go on to shape the future, from future world leaders to artists and scientists, but also by affirming the unbreakable spirit of humanity. These acts of rescue, executed in the face of machine guns and gas chambers, remain an eternal, powerful reminder that even in the worst of times, the greatest measure of a society is its capacity for compassion and the courage to act upon it. The silent heroes of these incredible missions did not win the war in the grand sense, but they won a victory for the human soul, securing a future built not just on survival, but on dignity and hope.